Ja, das ist ein Montag, weil danach liegt es ja, es kommt möglichst. Cool. Ansonsten machen wir jetzt noch ein paar Schnittbilder. Wir legen jetzt los. Genau, legen jetzt los. Ja. Steht, glaube ich, da hinten nach oben. Ihr müsst voll sein.
Are you in this class?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's all. Yeah, maybe we should make a bigger table.
Yeah, we could like move the tables and make one big one.
Yeah, let's make one.
Yep.
Your wallet is on the floor.
No, I have my own one.
Okay, the wallet. There's a wallet on the floor.
Jeremy, can we turn them around?
Yeah.
Was ist das Mikrofon, oder?
Yeah.
Ja. Wir drehen die alle jetzt so um, komprimieren die hierher, dann haben wir einen großen Tisch. Welcome. Actually, this is something for the very beginners. So I consider you like being, at least you can always jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. So.
I don't know. We'll see.
So who of you is completely new to the indie web? Who of you is completely new to the indie web? Okay. So this was a talk I gave at a conference like 1 year ago for complete beginners. So they had really no idea of what's going on and stuff. So I'll try to explain a couple of really basic building blocks of the indie web, just to get people into the topic. And the talk began with a little bit of history about how the indie web community evolved and what was the precondition for that. I'm not sure if you really need to know this or want to know this. Is there anyone who wants a little bit of history? You want? Okay. So, I will, nevertheless, this is not exactly for this situation, so I will skip some parts and like make it short. And if you have questions, just jump in and ask questions. Well, first of all, the indie web, of course, the word indie in indie web stands for like individual, independent, but I also consider it to be individual, which is at least as important for me personally, at least. And the indie web community is, first of all, it's an active community. That's the most important thing. It's not necessarily a technical standard or something, but it's a community, and it's also a kind of mindset. So the IndieWeb stuff is all about your personal identity and your personal website as the basis for all the things you publish. And of course, over the time there have been, we developed a couple of individual solutions for problems, which basically interoperate, but it's not a specific technology, so there's nothing you have to do to be indie. The history part is it's quite short, you know. In the 90s, you probably mentioned it already, and a couple of us do the web for like 20 years or something. So in the 90s, it was really easy, but also very nerdy to publish on the internet. You didn't need a lot of things. It was mostly a text editor and like an FTP connection, and also it was really popular. Yeah, just as you said in the interview, it was kind of normal to have your own domain, and a lot of people had it. And it was really easy to publish. Then there were the first hosting providers who offered you free hosting, like GeoCities, for example. So it was kind of nerdy but simple. About this was my first website, so it wasn't exactly my first website, and it took me a long time to reconstruct that. And actually, the marquee isn't working. This red on blue actually should move, but somehow I needed to reconstruct with JavaScript, of course, because it doesn't really work anymore.
It's probably on way that machine. The marquee.
Well, actually, yeah. Well, actually, this is not my real homepage, but like it looked like that around mid of 90s. So. Little bit later, a couple of services around all these blogs evolved, like Blogger and Tumblr, and the first content management systems or blogging systems evolved. Like WordPress was pretty early, and also Type 3, which we are like working with all day. It started in 2000, I think, and these kind of software made publishing a lot easier, actually. Then I will skip the part about RSS and Atom, but some discussions began about different formats and stuff. And at some point, this guy showed up, and not only him, but also others. What I want to say with that, social networks evolved, which are kind of different compared to blogs, because they were also even easier to use, and they were mostly free. What was also special about them, that was not only about reading, but there was also the writing capability baked into it. So they had a really low barrier to enter, and they of course have a great user experience, mostly because companies throw a lot of money on them. So it became this like war between the corporate web and the personal web, and at that point blogging got nerdy again. It was like, yeah, just as you said in the interview, it's a sign of resistance somehow to have your own domain. Problem about this is that these platforms are mostly what you call walled gardens. It's nice to be there, but the problem is that it's the playground of someone else, and you're playing there, and these services usually didn't have a lot of incentive to interconnect and work with each other. So people started distributing their identity all over these services. There was one for the photos, there was one for status messages, there was one for long blog posts or long form posts. And what people lost with that is the sovereignty over their data. So they kind of gave up ownership. That's what the IndieWeb is talking about when they talk about silos. And just as this one, silos may crash at some point. They are centralized, these services are centralized, and they're commercially motivated, and that's, I think, something we really tend to forget. Facebook doesn't have any, how do you say that in English? You can't expect them to behave like you expect them to behave. I mean, they're corporations, and they do what's best for them, actually. Usually you have these restrictions in their terms of use, so people don't read it, of course, but they give away the ownership over the data and allow them to exploit your rights. There are lots of there's IndieWeb Wiki has a long list of services that died over the years. You cannot control this. You can't control the corporations who are running these sites. And mostly, as soon as one of them disappears, you have pretty little chance to move away your data, because they're like these walled gardens, and it's mostly really hard, if at all, to get your data out of them. It's mostly even more complicated to get it into a new service or something. So these are just a couple of examples for the services which died already, and there is a long list of other services as well. So at this point there have been, for example, conferences about just dealing with how can we federate services and connect them with each other and make this and that work together. But the problem about these discussions was that nothing really happened. They was just talking about it. And the situation made a couple of people, that's mostly Tantec, which this quote is from, and Aaron and a couple of others. I think they were really frustrated and upset, and they decided to start something new, and that was actually the first IndieWebCamp back in 2011. I don't think I missed the very beginning of that community, kind of. I was like using microformats for far more than 10 years now, but I missed the beginning of the IndieWebCamp, IndieWeb community. I think I found out about 1 year later or something. And they wanted to I think the most important thing is that they wanted to really change something, not only talk about it. So they tried to figure out what they needed to do to have an alternative to these platforms. And the most important thing about that is that they try to foster their own identity on the web, and which is like your personal domain, and then interconnect with your friends outside of these platforms in the first place. But of course, the platforms are not evil in themselves, but they try to use them for their purpose afterwards. So syndication is a very important part of that. I don't know if you know this collection of principles that's on the IndieWeb wiki. It's kind of the most basic rules. I won't read them out loud, but it's basically about do stuff for yourself, try to stick to your own needs in the first place, document your stuff, exchange with others, be nice, help us to benefit from your experience, and the other way around, and have fun. That's also quite important. So this is the second part of the talk, and what I wanted to explain are the very basic building blocks of all the IndieWeb technologies. And I use this persona who I call Tom, and those of you who have been at the IndieWebCamp last week, you might have met Tom there. It's a guy from Frankfurt. I was asked why he has no legs. Well, actually, I don't know. I just forgot them somehow. And Tom is this guy who is he's a blogger, and he heard about the IndieWeb, and he's really interested in it, and he wants to start being indie. So this is a little journey about getting into the IndieWeb and using the first part of it. There is something I will use just to walk you through this, which is called IndieMark. And Tantik was thinking about how you could measure the indie webbiness of your website and kind of get a grip on where you can improve and what you can work on. So the visualization on the right, that's something I came up with just to make it a little bit clearer what this is about, because it's not really easy to grasp if you haven't seen it before. IndieMark is like structured an axis, and these axes around there are all, I hope you can read it, they're all aspects you can work on your website. So there's stuff like what do you post, how do you syndicate, what can you syndicate, what's the interface of all that, is it safe, I mean, what about security and stuff like that. So there are a lot of areas you can work on, and within these axes you can reach levels and I think it's basically Tentac's work, right? IndieMark. So
Yeah, it was brainstormed with a bunch of people. Yeah.
so they defined certain things you should have to be worked on and to reach a certain level on the IndieMark scale. So I will step you through the first 3 IndieMark levels. First thing Tom needs to do, obviously, to be an indie guy, is to get his personal domain. Sure, we were talking about a lot of that. The second thing sounds quite complicated, but is really easy. That is, he should get his website IndieAuth ready. IndieAuth is something Aaron probably could talk hours about it. IndieAuth is quite a kind of universal way to authenticate with your site. And I will explain what this means. We'll just shorten it a little bit. IndieAuth is basically uses only your domain as your username for logging into something. And the real authentication mechanisms in the background can be multiple ones. Like you will see examples for that. IndieAuth doesn't reinvent this authentication mechanisms, but uses the mechanisms of established services like Twitter or GitHub or several others. And you can delegate the real authentication to these services. You don't have to reinvent that. But the most important thing is that you only use your domain as your login name for that. How does this work? Well, actually, it's really easy, and you have to do only very little pieces on your website. Who of you has got a website with like links to profiles somewhere in the web? You do. I've seen it. Okay. So there is something very, very, very small you can do and add to your website. That's that rel equals me attribute up there. This is like you're telling that the URL you reference is a profile of yourself somewhere else on the web. So this is, you basically say, this is me at Twitter, or this is me at wherever. As soon as you did that, and as soon as the service itself does the same thing backwards to your website, there's probably a link to your website on your which service do you mention there? Okay, so Twitter does reference back to your website and also has this rel equals me on that link. Twitter does that. So there's a trust relationship between these two pages. The one says this is me at Twitter and the other one says this is me at home or something like that. So as soon as you've done that, you can, for example, do this. At the IndieWebCamp wiki, there's a login feature. If you go there and type in your domain, then what will happen is that the IndieAuth service in the background, which Aaron runs and wrote, will scan your website for all these rel equals me links you have embedded into your homepage and finds all the supported profiles you've linked from your website, which is basically Twitter in your case, or here in my site it's also GitHub and a couple of others, which is interesting, but let's just talk about these ones. So IndieAuth finds all these rel equals me and will, for every service it supports, that supports basically OAuth authentication, it will provide you with such a green button. And you can click on that. And next step, you will probably have seen something like that already in your life. You will allow Twitter to, you will allow the IndieAuth application to use your Twitter account. And in the next step, you will be redirected to your website, to the IndieWebCamp wiki, and you will be logged in. Sorry that this one is only in German. The basic thing I want to say is don't look at it, because this is what actually happens in the background. And the nice thing about it is you don't need to know anything about this, because this is what IndieAuth does for you in the background without you having to know anything. So this is really smart and simple. And you've already seen the probably two most important building blocks of an indie web technology, which is HTML. You have your website. And the second thing is microphones. Microphones, yay. Yay! Because rel equals me, the simple attribute you put on that one link, is already a very, very simple microformat. And these are the most important building blocks with all IndieWeb technology. So when it comes to communicating with each other, the websites, then this is actually to what it boils down in all cases. It's these very two simple technologies and don't need really more. I will have other examples that are there, especially about microformats later on. So I will do a recap later on. Before we do that, there is one last step. Oh no, I think it's there will be another one. Another step until Tom has reached IndieMark level 1. That is, he needs to publish content, of course, and every content he is publishing should have its own URL, which is called permalink. It's really important to have because this is like the ownership of your content. And the next step would be to add more microformats to that HTML. I think who of you has been in the microformats session before in the lightning talk? Yeah, most of you. So I won't talk about that again because you probably know what this means. What's basically on the screen is I just marked up a blog post with the appropriate microformats. It's H entry and P name and P summary and P category and so on. So I create an API to this blog post basically, so that machines can extract this information easily. And the last thing Tom has to do to reach IndieMark level 1 is he has to ensure that his content is accessible, which means searchable. Being searchable basically means not having or restricting robots.txt. Who of you doesn't know what a robots.txt does? Okay, so it's pretty easy. It's actually just a text file lying on the top level of your domain called robots.txt, and in this file you can prohibit search engines from indexing your site. That's it. So there are two solutions to that. Either don't have a robots.txt and don't prohibit search engines to do that, or have a robots.txt but give the search engines all access they need to your site to crawl it and index it. Otherwise it wouldn't be found, of course, which is not what you want. So this is a quote from Tantec as well. I think most of you will know what curl is, right? Who doesn't know what it is? Okay, so it's basically a very, very simple command line browser would be, like the wrong word, but very basic command line program to retrieve content from the web. You can just pull content from the web. And if you hide your content, for example, behind JavaScript stuff, all these fancy React, Angular, whatever thingies won't be callable, probably. So this is really hard for search engines to foster to harvest, sorry. So don't do it. Or at least have an alternative that enables searchability. This will be the result if you don't have a restricting robots.txt, that is, your pages should show up in search engines, for example. So, short recap of IndieMark level 1. Tom got his personal domain. He put a rel equals me link on his social profiles. He added some microformats to his blog posts, and he's searchable and he's findable on the web. So that's basically what IndieMark level 1 is defined. I will, as of now, it will become quicker.
Briefly,
Sure.
what has Tom got now that he didn't have before?
The most important.
I mean, why does Tom want to do this?
The most important thing probably is that he has added microformats to his website, which is like he added machine-readable content, or he made it easier for machines to read it. And there will be some technologies in the next levels that will build on that. So this is important. And what he can directly do with IndieMark Level 1 is use IndieAuth to log in to whichever site uses IndieAuth. That is, for example, the IndieWeb Wiki to change stuff there, but also basically every other service that provides IndieAuth. And here are a couple of people who provide IndieAuth login to their sites. So I think Sebastian is working on something where you can log into his site and do postings.
Yeah.
In this case, they're postings for him, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is just like gearing your site up for the next levels.
Okay.
And then the other way to solve the problem is.
So here's the next step. What you can do, what Tom is going to do, is he's going to put more contact information about himself into his homepage. I don't have to explain that, but that's microperformance again. So this is like information about him, his name, what he's doing, maybe a photo about him, stuff like that. So there is information on his homepage about him as an author. It doesn't really have to be on the homepage, but at least there has to be a link from the homepage to somewhere with this information. I think, Jeremy, you have got your contact information on your about site, right?
No, I've got them now.
Oh, you moved them?
Yeah.
Because I know we were talking about that like 2 or 3 years ago, and then you had them on your about site.
So I changed it to.
Yeah, that's also possible. There is like what's called the authorship, the IndieWeb authorship algorithm. That's where parsers should look for this information. There are a couple of fallbacks. So the next thing for IndieMark Level 2 would be to not only post one type of posts, but also a second or third one. You could, for example, start with notes, which is the simple most IndieWeb content type, basically status messages or something, what you would post on Twitter. And as a second or third one, you could, for example, start with photo posts or long form blog posts or something like that. So having more than one type of post is kind of a requirement for IndieMark Level 2. And finally, you can start to syndicate to several other services like Facebook or Twitter and so on. So there are these two mechanisms you can use. The one is called POSSE, which is like this awful acronym, but which stands for Publish on Your Own Site and Syndicate Elsewhere. That is, you publish your content to your domain first, and then syndicate to the different services. That could be like, for example, well, it doesn't work actually, but that could be to Facebook for long form posts, or to Twitter for status messages, or And then there is kind of the opposite, which is Pesos. That's exactly the other way around, like posting to the platforms first and then get back a copy of it, which is actually POSSE is preferable, but there are services where this is impossible. As far as I know, I don't use it actually myself, but Instagram doesn't allow posting to Instagram from somewhere else except the Instagram app. Also, the Instagram app is really a nice app and it works really well, so why not use that one? So Instagram only allows you to pull back the images after you post them. And in fact, Aaron built this service around that. I don't use it myself, but it's called OwnYourGram. You probably know better than me. But OwnYourGram is basically doing exactly this. You publish a photo to Instagram, and OwnYourGram gets informed and will like pull a copy to your website. And as far as I know, Aaron even made like OwnYourGram delete it on Instagram. You can't do it as far as I know.
Deleting on Instagram?
Yeah. I think there was something, so it was basically posting to Instagram and the image disappeared immediately again after his website like pulled it down again. So not sure if he's still using it, or not sure if it's working anymore because Instagram changed the API at some point.
Another deleting thing.
Okay, so these two principles are really common. These are a couple of other things you could work on, which are like kind of defined for IndieMark level 2. I won't go through them. I just like jump on to IndieMark level 3, but you see there are also like, this is the point where user interface is becoming important, or web actions is, for example, something you can use for like replacing the usual retweet, repost, like, whatever actions with your personal private ones. So that you, when you see a button somewhere that says like, you could like, instead of liking on that service, you could like overlay it with something like on my own website and put a like on there. So there are a couple of other things you could work on to reach IndieMark level 2. I won't go into detail here. There's one thing I would like to go into detail that's on IndieMark level 3, that's web mentions. Yeah.
One question before.
Yeah.
On level 2, there was one feature publishing on elsewhere, but isn't that just that what we want to avoid, that other services can use our data? And if I publish anywhere, then this service
Well, it's up to you. If you don't want,
has my data.
yeah, you don't have to.
But why is it part of level 2?
Well, a lot of the time that's where people are. So you're publishing a little update like, hey, I'm going to get some coffee or something. And if that's only on your website, but all your friends are on Twitter, or all your friends are on Facebook, then none of your friends are going to see it. So the kind of ideal scenario is it is still on your website. That's where the initial, the sort of canonical URL is. But then you can send a copy to Twitter or a copy to Facebook. And that's where your friends see it, because your friends aren't looking at your website, your friends are looking at Facebook. But if you don't care about that, then yeah, you don't need to send it anywhere. So a lot of the time it's because those places are where the people are. But you don't have to.
Then I didn't understand.
So
I didn't get it that you send the copy to the...
So
It sounds like you publish on the service.
you publish on your own website.
Yes,
There are these two principles.
and I was talking about the second one. The
Okay.
Pesos.
Pesos,
Yeah, that's
Pesos,
definitely-
yeah. That's less desirable. So what I just outlined, the posse, is desirable. So the reason why you might Pesos is it might be impossible to posse. So the case of Instagram was a good one. In Instagram, it's literally impossible to post a photograph to Instagram without doing it through the Instagram app. They've tied it down. Whereas with Twitter, it's totally possible to post to Twitter from your own website. You post to Twitter from anywhere you like. So the Pesos thing is less.
Also das ist zweite Wahl.
Yeah.
Das ist, so kriege ich halt noch was. Ja,
Okay.
wenigstens das.
Yeah.
Another reason why you might choose to Pesos rather than Posse is just ease of use. So a good example is Aaron uses the Swarm app to check into places. This app, it's a location service. I'm at Tollwerk. I'm at this place, whatever. And it's got a really nice interface, and it's got all this data. And if you're like, right, I'm not going to use Swarm for that. I'm going to do it on my own website. You can, but now you've got to make a nice interface, and you've got to get all the data about what place names are tied to coordinates. And that's a lot of work. It's doable, but in that case, it might be simpler to do the Pesos. You know what? I'll post on Swarm, and immediately get the copy sent to my own website. But you're right. That it's less desirable. Pesos is less desirable than Posse.
Okay. So last thing I really want to talk about, because this is also a basic thing for many other applications out there, is what web mentions. Of those ones of you who have you ever heard of pingback or trackback, or do you know what that is? Okay, so it's basically trackback, but web mention is kind of supersedes pingback and trackback, and web mentions as well, a mechanism to let domains or applications talk to each other and let the one tell the other that it has mentioned it in some way. So I won't go into the dark history of pingback something, but web mentions is like a really simple thing to do in the meantime. Well, that isn't correct anymore. Actually, it's a W3C recommendation in the meantime. So it's really successful and a great success for Aaron. Great success for the IndieWeb community. And how does web mention work? It's basically, it's pretty easy. That's Tom, and Tom is writing a blog post. And on the other side, that's Lotte. Lotte also has a blog. And she writes a blog post and mentions Tom's blog. So Tom would really like to know about that and would maybe even like have a reaction on that. So Lotte is sending him a web mention. A web mention is basically nothing else but a post request to a certain URL Tom provides, which is the web mention endpoint. And this post request includes two variables. That is the URL that was mentioned and the URL that is mentioning the other one. So that's basically it. And Tom is providing this endpoint, and actually it's up to him what to do with this signal he's getting. He might want, and that's what he's doing in this case, he might want to add Lotte's mentioning on his blog post at some point. And well, this is an example from my website, and you see that there are different kinds of responses I get from all over the web. Some of them are web mentions from other pages, some are comments that people wrote on my website, some are like likes and shares on Facebook and on Google Plus and on Twitter and stuff like that. And web mentions are a good way to collect all these reactions from all over the web. You could either do it yourself, that's what I did, and this is the hard way, or you can use, for example you can use a service called Bridgie, which is run by Ryan Barrett, and it's basically kind of a monitoring tool that observes all your profiles. You link to it, and if there's something going on there, like someone retweeted your status message or liked it on Facebook or something like that, Bridgie will send you a web mention. So this is a central point where you get informed that something happened out there. And you can then decide what to do with this information. Like, for example, integrating it in a comment-like thing under your blog post, for example. Or do whatever you want with it. What Jeremy was talking about, that check-in with swarms, also like Aaron built that service that pulls Foursquare and sends a web mention for each check-in to his site or Jeremy's site. So Jeremy's site then again considers what to do with that and puts it on the website. I've seen Sebastian also even added these little maps. I think that's also a nice thing. So there's one thing I wanted to explain in this situation, because you asked what's the benefit for this. One thing is, when Tom adds this mention of Lotte on his own blog post, he probably wants to write who's written this mention and maybe a little image of that. So, and this is an interesting point, because what now happens is the web mention only sends which URL mentioned it and which URL was mentioned. And when you put all this contact information into your homepage, as I said, you open up an API for other applications. So that's the starting point for Tom's web server to like process this web mention. And the first thing it will do is like, first of all, it will probably look at the URL that was sent, if there's really a link to his blog post, because it's kind of a security thing. Otherwise, you only have spam probably. And the next step would be Tom's web server would crawl Lotte's homepage and look for that microformat's contact information and pull out her name and maybe her photo and stuff like that. So that's the point where all these techniques fall into place.
Yeah, so the fact that, Tom at this point has marked up his blog posts with H entry. Right? That was level 1?
Yep.
Level 1. And you ask, but what does he get for that? Well, back then not much, but at this point, let's say Tom writes about something Lotte's written, Lotte gets the web mention, and she can now look at that web page and as a machine looking at their web page, it's just a bunch of HTML. But if you could say, okay, find me the HTML that looks like this, and it's the H entry stuff, then you can pull out just the bit that you know is the article and ignore the navigation and the sidebar and all this other stuff. So that's when the benefit starts to come in. And likewise with the H card. Otherwise, it's just an HTML page. But if you can say, yeah, but get me the bit that looks like it's got H-card, and get me the bit that says P-name, and all those classes, now the benefit starts to accumulate.
Yeah. So I think this was basically the end of. Well, okay. Well, that's just advertising for the next session, I think. But actually, no, that's not a building block stuff.
Although the one thing with Bridgie is, it is an amazing service, where you might get a bit nervous thinking, wait, now we're going to rely on a centralized service to do this IndieWeb stuff, which isn't very IndieWeb. You can, if you're up for it, you can run your own copy of Bridgie. It's open source.
Yeah, well, it's open source, and also you can do any other kind of quality services.
Yeah, so you don't need to rely on.
You can, you can basically roll your own services.
When Bridgie tells you there's a mention on Facebook,
Yeah.
how do you look up the H card thing there? I mean,
Bridgie does conversion for you. So, for example, Twitter tweets aren't in H entry, and Twitter profiles aren't in H card. But Bridgie knows that, okay, there's a tweet has mentioned your URL, it'll translate it into H entry and H card for you. So at your end, you just need to have a web mention that just sits there waiting for things to come in, and expects H entries and H cards.
okay,
And Bridgie takes care of translating it.
will be included in the body maybe, or
Yeah, and send it over. And you still have to just, parse it. You still have to parse it and do something with it.
It's up to you what you're
Yeah.
going to do with it.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool. It's amazing.
Well, that's basically some IndieWebCamp advertising. So, yeah, that was the talk. So, thank you for that. Otherwise, we can. So, do you have? What time is it?
It's coming up on past. That was good.
Okay.
Back on track.
Oh well.
But we're going straight into more
I
advanced
think
building.
my question is really directed at generations 3 and 4, maybe 2.
In the generations graphics, yeah.
And the question is, if I have a friend who says, yeah, but you're just geeking out over this, it's very hard to explain to somebody why they should geek out over it unless they like being geeky.
Yeah.
It's a really hard sell.
That's why the begin, instead of starting with that problem, which is a really hard problem, say, okay, let's start with eating our own dog food, right? Let's each of us geek out and do it for ourselves. And then, once we've been doing that for a while, all right, now let's see if we can tackle the really hard problem, which is how do you make it accessible, how do you make it
And how do you make people want to do it and
Exactly.
see the value of doing it?
Yeah.
Because, even step one means I can send web mentions to people, even if I'm not receiving them. And it's, I don't want to talk about critical mass or any of that, but it's still a very small community.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this is by design, right? You get that. By design, instead of saying, okay, we need to convince the world to do X, which is, people have tried and failed to do that in the past. Like, okay, instead of trying to convince the world to do X, we will do X. Small group will do X. Later, and through that, figure out the problems, figure out the formats, the technical building blocks, and then later say, okay, and again, rather than moving to let's try and convince the world, let's convince a larger circle to do X, and we can show them how to do it because we've already done it. It's not theoretical anymore. And then you can go, okay, how do we convince a larger circle again?
But it is the disasters that drive the spikes in adoption.
Yeah, service shuts down, something like that. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Delicious.
Yeah.
That's when I went to Pinboard. Pinboard's been a little flaky lately.
Yeah. It was a lot of people nervous about Flickr. Flickr's great, but
Well, yeah, never stuff.
Somebody-
But I've never left stuff on Flickr. But you know, having my own link collector, that's scary for me.
so this is where things like known are really interesting, because they're the first step to go beyond the circle. Okay, we're just eating, just think for ourselves. The with known things like, can we build a tool using the technologies that all these nerds are figuring out for themselves
Yeah.
to make it something easier?
Yeah.
I wish there were more than just known, but it's great that there's at least one. And then next step. And you're right. Well, ultimately, what you want to get to is a point where someone doesn't even need to care that much, but still wants to do it because it's easy, and you just press a button and you get all this stuff. But if we had jumped straight to that, it would have been, boiling the ocean. It would have been impossible. So it's just deliberate, like, okay, step by step.
People are already building plugins for a content management system like WordPress, Craftsy, and Graph also. So
Yeah, bit by
that's
bit.
the second
Yeah.
step.
Yeah.
People
I think that's expanding the circle slightly.
use it.
Yeah. And that interests me.
All right, we can get back on track.
WordPress plugins at the moment.
2:30 in here in Post-it note room. It's Building Blocks 2, Electric Boogaloo, India and Micropub, with more complex stuff. In Robot Room,
You can read that from
I
here.
can't read it.
Just guessing.
That's great.
What? No, seriously, what does it say? Onboarding of personas. Ah,
Exactly.
okay, you should
I
get
know,
in
but I
that.
also.
Get in that.
I mean, I see what I see getting people to do things as part of what I do. So it interests me that I can't explain to my friends why this interests me. I can say, well, you might lose your data, and they say, well, I haven't yet, and I say delicious, but they never use delicious.
It's for nerds first, it's true. But this is why the next circle out is journalists.
Yeah.
So that they can explain it.
What do you say about journalists?
Well, the next step. Okay. Let's say, we're all doing it for ourselves. We're a bunch of nerds, right?
I don't even
Maybe-
think so, but yeah.
Okay, but basically the idea is like, before trying to convince someone to do something, do it yourself.
Yeah.
Demonstrate it on your own website first.
Yeah.
Right, next step, maybe tell your friends, sure, whatever. Plugins for CMSs, that's all good. That's all slightly enlarging the circle. Services like with known, enlarging. Okay, next step, now let's say we are going to try and get into evangelism. We're going to try and get into spreading the word and try and convince people. You could try and jump straight to, I'm going to try and directly convince everybody in the world. But that's a big jump. And maybe a smaller jump is, well, who already talks to people, and explains things, and makes things easy to understand? Journalists.
We have
So-
a journalist here. This guy who's sitting here, he's a journalist by trade.
Yeah, and some journalists have shown up at IndieWebCamps and then gone on to write articles, which gets interest.
Teach it in schools.
That would be a larger step again.
Where does schema fit into it?
Schema is just a vocabulary made by Google and Yandex. and
So schema and microformats are orthogonal.
yeah, they're both vocabularies. The design behind microformats is, let's just have a few vocabularies for very common things. Right? People, places, events, stuff like that. And then stop. That's it. That's all microformats does. It doesn't try to encode everything. Schema.org is the opposite, which is, that's a vocabulary that can encode literally anything in the world. So if you're encoding a person, use the microformat, age card. You can use the schema.org vocabulary as well. They're not mutually incompatible as well. But if
you don't need to.
no, you don't need to. But if you're trying to encode something that doesn't have a microformat, some quite specific So they're like the tech specs for a television. There's no micro format for that because it's so niche, but there's probably a schema thing for it. So with microformats, it's about the 80/20. Very, 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 very common use cases.
Right.
And it deliberately doesn't
do everything.
It doesn't do everything. Schema.org is much more general.
I'm not sure whether I got it. I understood it's if I use schema, then if you search for the microformats, you mentioned once one function of the IndieWeb where a service searches for the microformat.
Right, so I make a web mention to your site and say, hey, I've written a response to your post. And now you can search that response.
Yes.
Say, okay, is there H entry here?
Yeah,
This
this
is the
is like some stickers getting old and boring, so
but I
over.
used schema.
Okay.
I don't
Will
really
you find
club
it
in
too,
Nürnberg,
or will
which
you
I
only find
never really liked, but
It's up to
was
me,
the
it's up to the
first
person
sticker
doing
I get
searching.
in my hands, so
My
I just
code
put it on
looks,
and
only
I
looks for
every
micro
time
format, doesn't
I
look
get
at
the
schema.
schema.
But I could add
I need
in,
to fill my.
Yes.
say, if you
Okay.
don't find the micro format, try looking
But
for
all of these, I got them in
schema.org.
this.
But if I want to be found,
All of these.
Some laptops
I should
here,
use
they're
both.
all, about web weeks.
Yeah, the mic-
because I don't know whether you
Stickers
search
and
for
stuff.
microformats.
It can tell to how many people.
If it's
how
to
many
do with web
conferences
mentions and stuff, you can
by
rest
looking at
assured
the
it's
stickers.
micro formats.
Ah,
But
yeah.
there's no harm in
He's-
throwing in
has
schema.org
only one
for
sticker,
other uses.
And he's
Yeah.
going to all the
Google
conferences.
or
Yes.
stuff like that. There might be other reasons to use schema.org, but you don't have to choose.
Ah, okay.
You don't have to choose. You can do both, and there's even more vocabularies out there. You can use them all if you like. You don't have to pick one.
One question, Jeremy. Where are you guys from Generation 2? How far away?
What was in Generation 2? Journalists?
Yeah.
That's sort of starting to happen at some of the indie web camps in America now. Dan Gilmore came on, and he started writing about it, but two, he started to consolidate his own writing on his own website
Okay.
more and more. So I'd say we're probably just about beginning.
So do you think that it might become like well known that you can talk to people about these things and they will know what it is about, like soon?
Don't know. Like I said, I mean,
It's interesting also the thing that Chris Aldrich has done, and I did too, copying him, of taking a journalist and saying, you know, what you're doing here is, you might as well be embracing a little more of IndieWeb. There was a woman who writes in England, writes for a lot of papers, who publishes her stuff on her website, as well as The Economist, Money Observer, Financial Times. And Chris Aldrich wrote a long post on his site saying, you know, here are the ways in which doing a little bit more would be even better for you as a journalist. And Tim Harford, who's another economist, does the same sort of thing. He writes for a paper or a journal or a magazine, and then he puts it on his own website. And journalists, and that's a sort of a form of Pesos. And so encouraging journalists to bring the discussion about that back to their websites is one way of doing it, because they all want to be talked about.
But then that, to be able to acknowledge
Do you know where I can find the live stream?
I think it's on the side of IndieWebCamp. There should be a link to it. I'm not sure, but this is what I found.
Post-it note room is building blocks 2 and usually off. Robot room is onboarding personas. And room 3
You go to the
is
chat room.
photos.
Yeah, the chat room. There's a link.